saw that. Brick killed a guy.
After Ant-Man 3 came out, I made a video about how I was done expecting good things from the MCU. Phase 4 was filled with disappointments, and the setup for Phase 5 didn't make the future look much better. Now, about 3 months later, we have Guardians of the Galaxy 3, the final chapter for this group of unlikely fan-favorite heroes. And after watching Guardians 3, I feel the exact same way I did after Quantumania. And that's not because I didn't like Guardians 3. I actually think it was a great movie and the perfect send-off for the characters who I, and many other MCU fans, ended up more invested in than 90% of the rest of the universe. James Gunn's work on Guardians has always stood out from the rest of the surrounding films, only to be rivaled by Thor Ragnarok, the recent Spider-Man trilogy, and the conclusion of the Infinity Saga. Guardians 3 had high expectations, and in my opinion, it met them. But it does nothing to strengthen my confidence in the future of Phase 5 and beyond, because James Gunn is moving on from the MCU to run the DCEU. The cinematography, character development, emotion, grounded storytelling, and tasteful mixture of humor and drama is all going towards DC's cinematic universe, not Marvel's. So the way James Gunn was able to land this one makes me excited for what he can do with an entire superhero universe at his disposal, not for the universe he's leaving behind.
Storytelling is always king. That's all that matters to us.
As I said, I think this is the best open-ended conclusion we could have asked for the Guardians. And this being the final movie, it had real stakes that none of the MCU content since Endgame has had. Anyone who followed the media surrounding Guardians 3 knew that character deaths were very much on the table, and you could feel that tension. It wasn't like any other MCU movie in recent memory, where you knew that all the main characters were going to be fine even if they're getting their asses kicked. Scott Lang isn't going to die to Kang in the final battle. I mean, they didn't even let a comedic relief character like Korg die in Love and Thunder. But with Guardians 3 being the last one in the trilogy, you knew that when someone was losing a fight, they might not make it out alive. That knowledge made the fight scenes of this movie inherently more engaging and dramatic than they have been in anything in Phase 4. Speaking of fight scenes, the action sequence in Guardians 3 might be the best in any of the 3 movies. The climactic, low-gravity hallway fight scene was awesome, and the rest of the fights were surprisingly brutal. Another thing that makes me excited for what James Gunn will do with DC. The MCU has a lot of one-punch knockout type fights, where a character slashes or throws an enemy to disable them. In this one, the Guardians were fully killing and maiming people. This is not a kid's movie. Nebula gets her bell rung multiple times, even getting hit so hard that her neck basically disintegrates and her head flops backwards before contorting herself back into proper posture. We see monsters getting their heads ripped off with their spines still attached and close-ups with bones snapping. It's not gory per se, but it certainly made the most of the PG-13 rating, and the level of violence felt more real than pretty much any other MCU movie I can think of. I guess your opinion on this may vary, but it definitely appealed to me.
I stabbed a man in the heart.
I mentioned that the stakes were higher in Guardians 3 because of the potential character deaths built up in the media surrounding the film, but the stakes were also lower on a cosmic scale. For the first time in a while, we're not facing the end of the world or the end of the universe. At its core, this is a story about the Guardians' quest to save their friend. The High Evolutionary as a villain isn't trying to conquer the universe, rather mold it into its perfect form. He has some cool gravity powers, but he's not even close to Thanos or Kang in terms of power level, making the inevitable final face-off believable rather than depowering a multiverse-level threat like we saw in Ant-Man. The villain was essentially a mad scientist. His motivations were believable, and the personal stakes were a welcome break from the doomsday potential we seem to face in almost every other Marvel release since Endgame. As expected, James Gunn was able to tastefully move between dramatic scenes that made me tear up in the theater to comedic relief that actually felt relieving, rather than the ill-timed, half-baked jokes we got from Korg and Love and Thunder. There were some legitimate laughs in here, not just a smile and I get it. These jokes had me chuckling for several seconds afterward just thinking about the punchlines. This leads me to one of my complaints about Guardians 3 because, while good, it had a few flaws. First, on the note of comedy, Adam Warlock. I'm not a Marvel Comics guy, but Adam Warlock fans probably won't love how he's depicted in Guardians 3. He's played for very little other than laughs with a shallow character arc that makes him feel like an afterthought in what is essentially his origin story. He's comedic relief and a stalling threat in a movie that doesn't really need either. Any other mini-boss could serve to stall the Guardians in some of their fights, and pretty much all the Guardians can serve as comic fodder, making Adam Warlock feel unnecessary. It almost seemed like James Gunn was told to tease him in Guardians 2, and then maybe Kevin Feige dropped the plans for the character heading to the Infinity Saga, but James Gunn couldn't just ignore the tease in Guardians 3, so he had to pay it off in some way. Adam Warlock did offer the Guardians a proper ass-whooping in the beginning, but he was basically too powerful to take part in the rest of the film, so they just kept sidelining him in one way or another.
You guys are getting paid?
The last complaint I had was actually the music, which Guardians of the Galaxy has become known for. Unlike the previous 2 films that had banger after banger, Guardians 3 had some hits and misses. If you don't want to know what song plays during the climactic battle, you can skip forward about 10 seconds or so. It was No Sleep Till Brooklyn by the Beastie Boys. A decent song and good for the hero walk that led up to the fight, but it was kinda dull for that scene in my opinion. Some of the other songs also felt kinda out of place or poorly integrated, where the first two Guardians movies seemed to make the most out of every track. Now onto a few spoilers before I talk about what this movie means for the future of the MCU and the DCEU. You can skip to here if you haven't watched it yet. Okay, first, something that bothered me big time in the theater and nearly pulled me out of the film early on. They do a decent amount of recapping at the beginning about Gamora and Quill and that whole dynamic, which felt a bit unnecessary to me because you really need to watch both the Guardians movies and the end of the Infinity Saga to understand what's happening in the first place. But that's fine, I don't really care about that, and they didn't linger on it too much. My issue was with one line that Peter said to Gamora when they had their first moment alone. Or so they thought, they ended up being on an open line, which was a pretty funny gag. Peter says to her, "You really don't remember anything?" What would she remember? She's literally a different person than the one you fell in love with, not the same person with amnesia. Why would she remember anything? They quickly moved on and it didn't matter to the rest of the movie, but it was a sore point for me and it stuck out and I had to mention it here. But on a more positive storytelling note, I actually really appreciated the fact that Peter and Gamora didn't end up together. The movie didn't focus too heavily on their relationship and instead kind of let it play in the background. And in the end, Gamora returned to the Ravagers and was shown to have bonded with them in a similar way that old Gamora bonded with the Guardians. This was one part of the bittersweet ending that tied up all the characters, at least for now. The post-credit scene confirms that Star-Lord will return, and I wouldn't be surprised to see the new versions of the Guardians kicking around in the future. But for me, without James Gunn, this story has ended, and I'm not particularly interested in the version of Star-Lord that punches Thanos in the face to essentially cause the snap in the first place.
What an idiot!
Although the tension of potential character deaths was hanging over our head for the whole film, no one died and everyone got their happy sad ending, and I'm not mad at it. The threat was enough for me to think that Drax, Mantis, Rocket, and Star-Lord would all die at different points in the movie, which inherently raised the stakes in all the fight scenes. That said, if Star-Lord died the way they teased it, I would have been pretty salty. He almost died for his iPod, which is on brand for the character, but wouldn't have been satisfying in the slightest. There were plenty of opportunities to have him die saving another character, so if he went out like that, it would have felt super cheap. And it really looked like he was about to die. When his cheek exploded, I thought for sure that was it. I don't know enough about space to know if any of that was realistic, but it really didn't feel that way. I'm not Googling how long a person can survive in space, but you can let me know in the comments if you did. No matter what, there's the half celestial detail to fall back on, so I guess you can make it make sense.
You're an imbecile.
Every character in the Guardians roster found a satisfying conclusion by the end of the movie. Peter went home to see his grandfather for the first time since he was abducted, showing that he's no longer running from his past. Drax the Destroyer became Drax the Father, filling the role that he's always wanted since his family was killed by Thanos. Nebula becomes the leader of the new society, Mantis gets to control her own destiny for once, Rocket finally accepts that he's a raccoon, and Groot finally speaks. After watching Guardians 3, I agree with the snippets for the ads. This was the best Marvel movie since Endgame. A pretty low bar to clear, but I'd still put it ahead of the Spider-Man movies, which were the only highlights of Phase 4 and 5 to this point. But even with such a great movie being the most recent Marvel release, I still have near zero confidence in the rest of the MCU. Love and Thunder wrecked my favorite existing MCU character. I have no interest in Kang as the next threat, and it looks like Jonathan Majors will be recast anyway. Guardians 3 was the ending for the last group of characters I actually cared about, and the mind behind their story is moving on to head up a rival superhero universe.
I wish there was a way to know you're in the good old days before you've actually left them.
The MCU isn't dead, and it may go on to do great things in the future, but it seems like it's DC's time to shine. James Gunn's already done great things with Suicide Squad and Peacemaker, and it feels like we're about to enter the age of the R-rated superhero movie. Disney's ownership puts family-friendly handcuffs on the MCU, and James Gunn won't encounter that at Warner Brothers. The proof of concept is there. Both Deadpool movies grossed almost $800 million each at the box office, and The Boys is the most popular show on Amazon Prime Video. It seems like we've seen the best that the MCU has to offer, and it's time for another universe to take what Marvel did right and expand on it. That's how innovation typically works. And while I'm disappointed that the MCU I once loved might be gone forever, I'm excited at the prospect that it gave way to something that could be even better. After seeing how he stuck the landing in Guardians 3, I'm confident that James Gunn is the guy to lead us into the next generation of superhero movies, and I can't wait to see what he has in store for us. Of course, that's just my take. If Guardians 3 revitalized your hope in the MCU, let me know why in the comments. Until next time, thanks for watching. Stay safe.